The Sonic abomination burst through a mobile task force soldier so quickly that he was atomized, reduced to little more than vapor. Armor, flesh, bones, all gone, just floating off of the blue mutant nightmare as it skidded to a stop on ratty red sneakers. It smiled, showing off all too many teeth in the process. "That was radical," it said, seeming to almost struggle with the words. "Almost as good as my favorite chili dogs." Let's wind the clock back 2 hours to see how all of this started, and if maybe there's some way to stop all this madness before it first started. Everyone would later say it happened so fast, so many thousands dead, but of course it would happen fast when you're dealing with the fastest thing alive. Security footage didn't make what had happened any clearer. The CCTV screen showed a street where everything was seemingly normal. People walked, talking to each other on the phone. Some vendors lined the sidewalks, some selling fruit, others selling knockoff merchandise of various franchises made cheaply under questionable labor conditions in the Far East. Everything was normal, safe, as expected. And then, the flash came. It moved laterally from left to right, like a cannonade fired from one end of the street to the other. The ones who'd been unlucky enough to be in the path of the object were immediately splattered or incinerated, the sheer kinetic force of the impact completely displacing their atoms. But the ones arranged further back in the street didn't have any better luck. Fractions of a second after the projectile passed, a shockwave followed it, tearing up the ground and sweeping people from their feet, like the swash of a nuclear explosion. The entire street was carried section by section up into a swirling oblivion. You could see fragments of this when it was slowed down, but in real time, it took about 0.7 seconds, and with this little slice of it just happened to be the best view, the perfectly straight line of chaos and devastation actually split across the entire city. It was as though God itself had leaned in with a flaming scalpel and decided to make an incision in the earth. Everyone within a square mile of that line was dead, simply nothing left of them. And if you fanned out to the several miles beyond, you'd see smashed windows, fires, hearing loss, rolling power outages. This was like nothing anyone had ever encountered. Anyone, of course, except the personnel of the SCP Foundation. They had mobile task forces on the scene immediately, collecting data and also helping the conventional emergency services and disaster relief efforts. Witness reports from those who'd seen long-lens footage described the same thing. A blue flash, perhaps some kind of munition, moving at impossible speeds and annihilating everything in its path. One person who'd seen the original video described seeing something even more disturbing. Sonic, the tentpole character of the extremely popular Sega video game franchise. Given that the clearest footage was of a street where knockoff plushies were being sold, some researchers assumed that perhaps it was some malformed Sonic plushie that'd been kicked up by the storm flying towards the camera. However, when professional Foundation video analysts were brought in to look at the footage a little closer, they found that the claims of a certain incredibly fast blue hedgehog being involved were not, in fact, just exaggerations. When a single frame was isolated, they saw the monster, a twisted, bloated mutant version of Sonic, with a huge gaping mouth, monstrous claws, and glowing red eyes. It was a regular Sonic.EXE up in here. And now the Foundation needed to do two things: figure out how such a creature had come to be, and then do whatever they could to get rid of the damn thing. That would be enough of a challenge if it was just Sonic all on his lonesome. But as it turned out, whatever had created this nightmare version of Sonic had also created a few of his friends, and while not as powerful, it turned out they were just as bloodthirsty. In another nearby city, Miles Tails Prower was demonstrating his malefic power. This version of Sonic's best friend, a flying two-faced fox, was attacking a group of people who all tried in vain to flee. It looked like a dark parody of Tails, unnaturally stretched with a cruel facial expression, and patches of his fur missing from mange. Whereas Sonic's violence was geared towards mass murder, Tails preferred to swoop down and grab one victim at a time, carrying them up into the air, higher and higher and higher, and then dropping them down to a gruesome death on the concrete below. Another of Sonic's allies, the pugilistic Knuckles the Echidna, was also getting up close and personal with some of his victims. This version of Knuckles had terrifying, Rat-Fink-esque proportions, with giant fists and a perpetually drooling mouth. He'd crawled out of a train tunnel and began attacking commuters, each one killed by a single one of his spiked punches. They perforated every single one of the body's vital systems while simultaneously breaking every single one of the person's bones, letting out these terrible snarls that sounded eerily like the voice of British actor Idris Elba. It chased and pummeled anyone who tried to escape. The screams only seemed to aggravate its aggressive tendencies. And you might be wondering, where are the first responders in all this? Beat cops and SWAT teams returning fire. Why couldn't they try to stop Tails or Knuckles? The answer to that is simple. They were all dealing with Shadow. Shadow the Hedgehog, the edgiest of all the Sonic cast, was in a one-Hedgehog standoff with thousands of cops in the middle of the city, the spot where Sonic's ruinous advance had rendered the ground into an extended flaming trench. Shadow is both beloved and infamous for his tendencies towards violence, including the use of real guns, and that had somehow been incorporated into his body, and we mean that literally. He'd grown a kind of Kevlar ballistic vest underneath his fur, absorbing the impact of incoming fire from the thousands of cops garrisoned in the facility. And disturbingly, Shadow was also equipped to give as good as he got it. One of his arms was molded into what appeared to be some version of an M16 assault rifle with a seemingly limitless magazine, and the other was an APC-9K submachine gun, a smaller weapon with a substantially more dangerous fire rate. Shadow darted forward, fusing impressive speed and sharpshooter skills to terrifying effect. Every bullet he fired seemed to find a chest or head somewhere, massacring the boys in blue like the world's largest tin can alley. He was too fast for most of them to even land a shot on him, and the rare few that did manage to hit this blur of a target didn't manage to penetrate his thick Kevlar hide. If they didn't get back up, they might all be cooked soon enough. And in the darkness of a nearby warehouse district, the Sonic franchise's most sexually confusing character, the femme fatale known as Rouge the Bat, was indulging in her most vampiric impulses. As dock workers tried to flee, this nightmarish flesh version of Rouge, whose face now had pitch-black eyes and the frightening triangular snout of real-life vampire bats, descended upon them. She'd grab each one, enveloping them in her huge veiny wings before sinking her fangs into their necks and drinking deep of their life essences. When she pulled away, Rouge's victim fell to the ground as a desiccated husk, her belly bulging with what had once been flowing through their veins, a bloated tick. And no matter how many she drained, it never seemed to satisfy her bottomless hunger. While all of these horrors were unfolding and the Foundation was marshaling its armed response, an elite group of field agents were being sent to the possible origin point of the Sonic onslaught. By analyzing the straight-line trajectory of the initial Sonic attack and cross-referencing it with the known positions of the other Sonic characters, the Foundation built a data model. Now they could pinpoint the most likely origin of the chaos they were facing. And as luck would have it, that was actually exactly what the field agents found: an old red brick building that seemed to be filled with factory equipment, and a number of large glass tubes, each one broken and spilling green liquid out into the facility. Immediately they knew what they were dealing with, though that didn't at all lessen the shock of actually seeing it here in person. It seemed to be another instance of SCP-3325. The original instance that they contained decades ago was some kind of anomalous biological facility. It was designed to produce real flesh and blood entities based on the spec for a Sesame Street-esque children's television program. While the Foundation managed to contain that particular anomaly despite the dangers it posed, they never considered the possibility that other franchises, or even other companies, might be using the same technology. And if that biotech could now reproduce characters that had some of the actual powers of the original basis, then they were looking at a whole other league. But strangely, knowing that this was the origin of these creatures actually brought a degree of confidence to the personnel of the SCP Foundation. If these were demons taking the form of Sonic characters, psychic projections of a reality-warping child, or the fallout from a failed thaumaturgic experiment in Sega's own offices, they might be playing by an entirely different rulebook. This wasn't the situation here. However terrifying and powerful they were, these were entities of flesh and blood, operating to some degree on the exact same set of rules as the rest of them. These creatures could bleed, and when you can bleed, you can die. An outcome that the Foundation intended to secure for all of these monsters. Several Apache attack choppers, modified for stealth, were sent in to attack Tails. While he was a threat to the unfortunate unarmed people on the ground, he was much less of a threat to several Stinger missiles and the sustained fire of the helicopter's fixed Gatling guns. There was soon very little left of the mutant abomination left to speak of, and the Foundation could work on clearing away the bodies of Tails' victims and developing cover stories. An armed strike team was also sent down to the subway where the monstrous Knuckles was rampaging. Unlucky for him, the strike team knew a way to end his cursed life. One of the team members loaded up an RPG and fired the payload directly at Knuckles, the force blowing him back into the train tunnel. The whole thing was carefully timed, as Knuckles was knocked back into the tunnel just as an armored train was approaching. The creature let out one more bestial growl as the train hit it, completely mulching it in an instant. While all this plan was unfolding, several other teams were sent in after Shadow. Some wanted to just carpet bomb the area to be safe, but that idea was rejected. Instead, teams were instructed to go in with 50 caliber sniper rifles, with specially designed armor-piercing rounds. They would be able to negate the protective effects of Shadow's built-in Kevlar bodysuit, though that didn't solve the whole problem. For that, multiple trucks filled with boiling tar were brought in, and instructed to pump out their hot load onto the streets. When they did this, Shadow soon found that his ability to move at great speeds was seriously diminished. Before he could consider any means to remedy this problem, there were already 5 sniper bullets piercing his heart. Sonic, naturally, was the hardest one of all to destroy. When Mobile Task Force operatives went up against him, his incredible speed allowed him to seemingly dodge anything they dared throw at him. Bullets, munitions, the blades and clubs of expert melee combatants. Sonic would always blaze through them, leaving either the dead, or worse, the completely annihilated in his wake. He'd always laugh in pure glee afterwards. But in his eagerness to destroy and his arrogance that he could not in turn be destroyed, would be what the Foundation used to achieve that very goal. While Sonic was busy killing what he thought were Mobile Task Force operatives, but were actually D-Class personnel in disguise, they were setting up a genius trap. A web of nigh indestructible microscopic wires, each one sharper than the edge of the finest razor blade. While Sonic was in the midst of his bloodlust, Foundation operatives instructed a D-Class to stand right in front of it. Sonic laughed and sped at the D-Class, vaporizing straight through him and then traveling at warp speeds through the wire trap the Foundation had set up. It took a few hours to pick up and bag all the pieces, but it was very safe to say that SCP-3325 Sonic had been well and truly decommissioned. Rouge wasn't the only one that wasn't killed in the Foundation counteroffensive. When 2 different mobile task forces arrived at the docks where she'd been preying upon all those poor workers, they found a pile of completely exsanguinated human corpses, but no well-fed bat lady anywhere to be seen. She must have escaped at some point during all the chaos, and the Foundation attempts to find her are still ongoing. Though still, 4 out of 5 isn't a bad batting average for anyone. While the threat in this case had seemingly been mostly neutralized, the researchers back at the SCP Foundation didn't seem like this new turn of events had brought them any comfort. Dr. Gears, who had been intimately involved in the containment of the first SCP-3325 factory, seemed even more sullen and serious than usual. One of the other senior researchers asked him why he seemed so glum, even though they'd successfully stopped the massacre of the nightmarish Sonic clones. He thought deeply and said, "When we first contained SCP-3325 all those years ago, I was under the assumption that it was the only facility of its kind, and that the facility was solely capable of producing the anomalies it was specifically contracted to create. I realize now how naive I was before. If there are more of these factories out there, and these factories can produce anomalies based on any character from any piece of intellectual property, then this may be one of the most dangerous anomalies we've ever encountered. And perhaps more importantly than even all that, if there were still more out there, then they'd surely be hearing more from them a lot sooner than they'd hoped." Now check out SCP-2935 Oh Death, and more epic SCP stories you can't miss. And SCP-682 Ways SCP Foundation Tried to Kill Hard-to-Destroy Reptile for more.